you're not going to be able to come to webinars anymore. We think the puppy's going to lose her webinar privileges because she does not behave during the webinars. All right, welcome back, everybody. I'm going to start with a little bit of airbrushing on the purple and white costume. We're going to put a little bit of color on the bodice, just like we put some color on the netting to kind of help the idea that behind our appliques it's super rich and purple and then kind of fades up to pure white. And then I am going to make a whole panty because I had a couple people that took the last one in email requests, said let's do a whole panty start to finish rather than me doing like a part of it and coming back to it. Totally great. And then I will show you guys a couple different ways to ruffle netting. Taylor, are you mad that I'm talking? She is. Come here. I'm going to lock her up. You be quiet. You might have to lock the puppy up. In the past, she's just sat here so nice and quiet. Okay, so let's look at, so this is the white bodice. Hang on, I'm gonna go scold the dog. No, because she'll only bark more. No. I doubt that worked, but let's see. Just come over here and cuddle with us. Come be part of the thing, dog. So I've got my airbrush and I've got some pink and some blue, and we're gonna mix up some purple and we're gonna lay out the bodice and figure out where we want this color to go. And I put some gloves on so that I try not to get like paint on top of everything else, which usually happens anyway. But first we're gonna lay out our bodice. So we've got our fronts with our seam in the front. And this is flat lining, just like we looked at yesterday, where we stretched the bodice on to the fashion a little bit. And also, this is really nice 4-ply silk from Preview Textiles in New York City. I don't know if you have to have a wholesale number to shop from them, but everybody can get a wholesale number. Boy, she likes to chew on cords too. So I'm gonna lay it out first and kind of decide where the purple is going. So we want purple to grow from the bottom of her hip up to white. So I'm going to say that we don't even need to put any color on our side pieces. Remember, we got rid of the side seam, so our side front and side back are joined. So we're not going to put any color on them. And then we're going to use our hip pieces to kind of help us figure out where we're going to put color on the front and on the backs. And we're going to put a little denser color at the bottom and then just fade it up a tiny little bit at the top. So I have got some pink and some blue. And I've got just a little mixer bottle. These little teardropper mixer bottles are great. And I have just a smidge of water in it, because I know that having a smidge of water in there is going to help me mix this up a little bit. Now, some people I read recommend way more water, you know, when they're airbrushing. They're like, oh, put half water and it goes through the airbrush so nice. The problem is you get the paint particles get further away when you add more and more and more and more water. So then you have, if you really water it down, you might end up doing a couple coats. Just kind of watch it when it dries. And I'm just trying to get something that's anywhere in here, and I'm going to add a smidge more pink. I'm not totally trying to match it to the net. I just want some some color behind the applique also on the bodice. And what's great is this Createx airbrush paint. It already has textile medium in it, so it's ready to go for fabric. All we'll do is after it dries is heat it up just a little itty bitty bit. Oh good, she's playing with a dog toy on Dog Island. Let me plug in my airbrush. We go through the airbrush compressors pretty fast. This one's almost dead. Okay. So, well, I'm really struggling with this little mic attachment today. So I've got a dual action airbrush today, which means when I pull down on the trigger, I can hold it up here closer too. So what dual action means is when you push down, you get air and no paint. But when you push down and pull back, you get more and more paint the further back you pull the trigger. So I am going to start with just a little bit of paint in my reservoir. And actually, I've been painting some stuff pink, so I just rinsed this out. So I've got a little leftover pink in there. And I am going to flip all of this upside down so that I can be blowing the paint away from me. And I'm going to put a little bit of something over the very top of this bodice. So if I spill, I don't end up dumping some paint where I don't want it. So I'm just double checking that I've really got my bottoms at the bottom. And this will just help me kind of protect stuff a little bit as I'm working. Now, what you do have to watch for too is that if you're masking something off, that you're actually not just making a line when you're painting, because airbrush has the tendency to do that. But I'm going to be blowing away from me. So I should really move those guys out of the way. Put the lid on too well. And the first thing you want to do is just kind of test a little bit and see what's going on. Oh, that's purple. Okay. So I'm going to start off faint across my bottom edges, and I can always beef it up. And I've got this basted together so I can see I've got a thread line is where the netting is going to join. So it's at that thread line is where I'm going to make it the densest. And I find it's easier to do this when you've got the bodice in pieces to kind of get some color on it. And then when it's put together, you can go back and add a little more color. And it's not going to go on perfectly flat just because that's kind of the nature of it. So we're going to hit it kind of from one angle and then come back and hit it from another angle. And this is going to have appliques over it. So I'm not going to be I'm not ultra worried about making it absolutely ultra perfect. She's got a dog toy. So she's doing better than she could be. The puppy, she just does nothing all day long, hangs out, goes outside, goes to the bathroom, hangs out some more. And then as soon as we come over here to do a class, she just starts to lose it. It's so funny. So now I'm going to start, I'm going to kind of look at it and go, I think I can put a little more color. So if you want fainter color, get a little higher up. But then I want to really deepen that bottom edge. I'm going to go at it a little bit closer and really really fill in that bottom edge with color. And then when this is sewn up, I might say, oh, I'm going to airbrush it just a little bit more. But this is a good start. So I want the bottom to be more saturated than the parts higher up. And after this sets, we'll give it a press with the iron. Almost done. Now, if we want, since we've been blowing it one direction, we can come back and kind of be more careful and hit it from the other direction. Just remember that the paint particles are going to crawl that way. They're going to crawl up or away from the airbrush. And I've got this extra beyond the seam allowance. I'm not really worried about painting that. And then just for fun, since we've got pink over here, we might put just a faint little bit of pink above the purple. And then it's like I'm kind of looking from one piece to the other to see if I have something similar going on or not. Then let's just put a little pink in. Just for fun. Normally you would clean out the purple. But I'll just use pink paint to run the purple out. Is she doing dog approved stuff?
She's just sniffing bad ancestor.
A little, like a squirt ketchup bottle, like those little short squatty ketchup bottles with rubbing alcohol is great for cleaning this stuff up. Oh, I like that. Just a smidge of pink. So we actually might put a little bit of pink on the bottom of the side pieces. And there's quite a bit of pink in that lace that we're using too. So I think this will make sense when it's all done up. And let's put just a little pink on the bottom of these guys. Whoop. I get carried away and always screw something up. Makes it more fun. So now let's switch that on. Jared, would you just put this in the sink, in that bucket in the sink, and just make sure it's covered with water? We don't want it to dry out, because that's the worst. As soon as an airbrush gets crud dried in it, it's over. So let me take off my gloves, because there's a little paint on the gloves. I don't want to touch anything. This is where I would screw it all up. Let's grab a piece of our lace that we were working with yesterday. and just kind of see. Yeah, so that's going to make a real subtle thing underneath there. But if I hold this up, you can see just that little bit of purple and that little bit of pink kind of fills this in. It makes it a little bit denser, and then it's going to blend up to nothing as we work our way up her torso. And then on the sides, there's going to be just hardly any pink. But it's gonna turn out really, really cool. So let's see. These are gonna get pressed with a press cloth. You always want to put a cloth on top of this stuff when you do it so that you're not putting paint right on the iron. Now, let's make a panty. Does anybody have a question about what I just did? We also have a quickie old airbrush webinar if you're interested under past webinars, where I just squirt some paint on different stuff and like show you how to clean the airbrush. That's the #1 thing. If you don't clean it, you will really have problems. But where our color is, it seems like it's going to work out the whole way across here. So let's make a panty. And it's pretty much already dry to the touch, so go airbrush paint. If you add more water, it will take a considerably longer to dry. Okay, panty time. So our girl for this one has a 30-inch high hip, and I generally like to make the panty a hair bigger than their high hip instead of having it just fit.
No.
So I'm gonna, oh, and actually with this class, everybody can send me a panty size request and have a panty with the class. So I'm just looking to see what I've got. There's a 30-inch high hip. These things get traced and cut up and put back together so many times. We're always like making it a hair bigger for somebody or a hair smaller for somebody else. Never got quite the size you want. But this one was a 31 and we changed it to a 32. So to make it a 32, we just sliced and added into it, but I'm going to close that adjustment up and it's going to be a 31, even though it says 32 on here. This is going to no longer be a 32. And somebody asked in our group the other day, actually a good question. They said, your panties don't list the high hip. What you can do is just take a tape measure and go down from the waist. Actually, we can kind of guess what this high hip is. And I'll see if it really is a 31-inch panty. We've also got a PDF on, there's like some free patterny stuff. There's a couple PDFs there about like adjusting the girth of a panty and adjusting like the waist or the hip. And that's just ready to download. And with the stretch panties, you want to be, you've got options. You can try to get it like exactly right on, or you can say that you're going to have a little bit of ease to squish in. I generally like to have a little bit to squish in, but if you're a heavy-handed sewer and really stretch stuff out while you're sewing, you might cause your panty to grow and grow and grow. So you might start with a high hip actually on purpose that's a little bit smaller. And this was a 32. So I want to make this a 31. So I just measured my high hip and it was 16. So 16 times 2 is 32. So I'm just picking a spot over her butt and I'm going to take out a 1/2 inch at the high hip, but I'm going to leave the fullness in the butt because elastic is going to take care of that. But if we wanted to guesstimate what the full hip was on here, we would come down almost to the bottom of this narrower part. and work our way across. And that's like just a shy, it's just a almost 18 and a half. So we could say that this fits a 36, 37-inch full hip. But with this being stretchy, I would say that it goes an inch on either side of that. I would say that this could fit from a 35 up to a 38. She's got a spoon. Jared's getting his exercise chasing the dog. Now, let's look at this, right? This panty pattern has all these lines on here for placing netting for those that like to put a row of netting on every single line. We're not going to do that. We're going to just use it kind of as a reference for the top and bottom, and that we are going to double our netting when we ruffle it. So we don't need so many lines, but these lines are a good reference if you're into that. And we're going to be using a layer of heavy stretch mesh and a layer of softer stretch mesh. So we use the two layers to create the leg opening or the casing in the leg rather than like applying on a casing or using bias or something. And the other thing that's on this panty, there's this gray area marked where you could feed an extra elastic in. So since the panty is two layers, you could zigzag a line above and below that casing so that you could fit a 1/2 inch elastic in. Because what happens over time with a stretch or even a woven panty is after lots of wear, it will grow a little bit. And sometimes the net, even tacked beautifully, the net will want to go down like that. It means that the panty is coming away a little bit from her body. So it might be hooked at the high hip, might be hooked at the thigh, but if it's bubbling away from her and you've got this casing in there, it's just somewhere you can pull an elastic and tighten it up. Sometimes on a lead lady, or if like a sugar plum or a snow queen that we think is going to get used and used again, I'll put a casing in there like that and just tell whoever it went to that over time, if they want to bring that back in, they are absolutely able to. So let me grab my meshes out of the way, Jug. So this looks kind of like a hot mess. I'll kind of unhot mess it a little bit. But what are you barking at? You guys, she's not coming for the next webinar. She can stay home and be sad. How does that sound, Taylor? You can stay home and be sad. So what is going on here? This has been used for a few different classes recently, and it just needs to be trimmed up. So since we're always cutting a layer of stretch mesh and a layer of heavier mesh, I just roll the two together on the tube so that I don't have to cut twice. I'd like to do it so I can just cut one time. But I need some big scissors. Actually, I can do this with the rotary cutter. They're not in there. That's all right. I just need to zip off all this. Everybody tries to hang on to these random skinny chunks that you can't make anything out of. And I like to just cut them off. So when we open this up now, and it's slid a little bit, we've got a layer of softer sheer mesh and then a layer of like the medium weight or heavier mesh. It's more like what old-timey girdles were made out of. I think usually that 2 layers of the medium heavy stuff or 2 layers of the heavy stuff is way too stiff for anybody, which is why I like to use a layer of the super sheer, like the more sheer stretch mesh, and then the heavier stretch mesh. Pins, I need some pins, Jaren. It's just a runaround day. We've been finishing things up for different places, and I've been getting over pneumonia. So right there, there's all kinds of them. Are there some there? So we're gonna cut both layers of this out at the same time, but I like to pin along the leg hole first so that it does not shift around. So I'm just kind of guessing where my leg opening is. And I'm just putting a couple pins. Hopefully they're far enough away that they're not in the way of the serger. And the other note that's there on the free stuff, it's somewhere, it says like pattern info or something on Halsey Onstage. We have all sorts of different schools and companies that all have different ideas about how wide this should be. I generally like the crotch to be like 2 inches when it's done, maybe 2.5. So our panty is cut a little bit modest, and there's a visual in there on how to narrow up the crotch. So this crotch has been narrowed in a little bit. And that's another thing, like if you've got something that you're working from that you already like how it goes or how it fits, just use that as a reference. And the two meshes, one is really stretchy on the cross and the other is really stretchy on the straight. So we say that we've kind of balanced the stretch out. So the way that I've got this rolled up here is that one of them is a little tighter one way and the other is a little bit tighter the opposite way. And that kind of makes for a more even thing when you're done. So I'm just marking my center front. And then I'm going to flip this over. So with the two meshes here and using them in kind of like a sturdied up way by cutting, by having a mesh that's stretchier one way and the other stretchier the other way, we usually cut panties either direction and they work out just fine. And if we were using 2 layers of the shearer mesh, the thinner mesh, then I would cut one panty out single and then rotate it and then cut out the other one so that you have one running each grain. And then the heavier mesh, or this actually the heavier of the two I've got here, I would say is more of a medium weight mesh. The one that we've got right now has about the same stretch either direction. And since it's the sturdier of the equation, in the end, it really doesn't even matter which way, straight or cross, for the shear mesh, because the heavier one is more in charge. Okay, so I've got my leg openings pinned. I've got my center front with a mark on it, and I might take and put just a couple really faint pencil lines down my center, because I like to kind of always know where that is. And hopefully my rotary cutter isn't skipping, and I can pick this up without snagging the mesh, and we're good. So the reason we pin these legs together now is we're not unpinning it. We're going to serge the leg holes first. And the other thing that I'm going to cut out of the heavier mesh is I need a couple rectangles that are 1.5 inches wide by like 6-ish kind of inches long. So I'm going to do a nice straight line. I'm going to cut 1.5 inches. My nice straight line. Oh, it was pretty straight. And these are going to go in the center back to reinforce where we're going to put a hook and bar in the panty. And about 6 inches is enough. Oop. Okay, so I think, let me roll this up, and we're going to move to the serger for a little bit and a sewing machine that has a zigzag. So I've just got a Bernina out because it does all of that. And we are going to make the whole panty. So I've got my two little support pieces. I've got my panty. Let's go to the serger. I just got every machine possible over here. So we're going to do a few surgeon steps and then some sewing machine steps. And once I get going, I'll let you know what other stuff I need. And I'll tell you what I'm doing as I go. Boy, the light really makes it awful. I'm going to do it without the light on. It seems like it will show much better.
Yeah.
Poor me. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is serge the two leg holes together. So not the crotches, just the leg holes. And the mesh the thinner mesh will want to shift a little bit, so just don't let it. So this panty pattern has seam allowance in it. It's ready to go for a serge. And you can trim off like an eighth just to make sure you're getting the edges together nice. So there's one leg hole from front crotch to back crotch. Then we're going to do the other leg hole just the same. Shh, dog. Maybe I should lock her up. Come here, Taylor. Come here, puppy. You could be by me this whole time. Sorry, guys. She's usually not this awful. Okay, so we're going to pull those pins out. Come here. Come say hi to everybody. I don't even know where she is. Okay, we're going to pull those pins out. And then the next thing we're going to do, so right now we've got serging on the outside of everything. We're going to turn it so that the serging is on the inside. And then we are going to do a zigzag right over the edge. So we're going to center the sewing machine foot on the edge of the leg opening and do kind of a medium zigzag to keep that serging nice and flat in there for all time. I find if you don't do the zigzag, the serging kind of rolls weird and it doesn't look as nice as you want it to. So I'm going to put my machine goes to 5, so I'm going to do like 3.5. No, I'm going to do a little less than 3 actually. Maybe slightly wider zigzag than the length. Come here, dog. You can handle this. Here, come on, come sew with us. Isn't that fun? Every costume leaves with just a little dog spit on it. Okay, so what I'm doing with my finger is I'm just kind of rolling this to get the serging in the center. I know some folks like to pin this, but I think relying on the pins you end up a little bit more crooked. So I'm just centering the foot on there. And I'm going to go across the whole leg opening. And kind of, you can monkey with your length and width a little bit until you're satisfied with how it looks. So what's different from some panty making methods is we've got the 2 layers. And that's how we're going to create our casing. We're going to just stitch a line between the layers. We're going to zigzag. And we're going to put 3/8 inch elastic in here. It's Friday, everybody. Can you believe it? You see, I leave that little serge tail on for a little bit because it gives you something to hold. Now let's do the other leg. And then when we go to put our casing in for a 3/8 inch elastic, it's not really 3/8 from the edge. We have to see how much room is left. Like, right, because the zigzag is killing. I did a little back stitch there. The zigzag is swallowing up some of our room. If you've got a cover stitch machine, you can cover stitch this. We used to cover stitch a lot. We'll have to dig it out again. Nobody who knows how to thread it is left. That's the problem.
I don't think I've ever seen one.
Oh yeah, it's right there. It's the machine on the other side of that rack under the white. It's very intimidating looking. It's got like 5 knobs, dozens of needles, lots of places where you can lose a finger. If we're doing a lot of leotards, then we get it fired up. Okay, so now I want an itty bitty ruler, which actually I've got one on my sewing machine. Do you see a little, or the big ruler's fine. Hand me that big ruler. So now what I was saying is this is all white on white and it won't show. But remember, our zigzag is taking up part of our edge here, right? So if we want to put a 3/8 inch casing, if I put a pin, this pin is at where the edge of my zigzag is. See, the edge of my zigzag is in a little bit. We need to go 3/8 of an inch beyond that. So I'm going to just find 3/8 on my ruler and put a little dot. But now remember, when we zigzag again, we want this side of our zigzag to not close up our casing. So I'm going to kind of use this little dot in the guide on my sewing machine to figure out where I'm putting this edge so that I end up with 3/8 inch of a space left. I don't want to close it up. It'll be too tight and the elastic will go in there like a wicked old witch. Okay. So I'm going to just, even though I'm not going to start sewing right there, I'm going to use that dot. So I want my zigzag to be on the right. I'm going to use that to figure out where am I placing this on my guide. And that's like I'm putting the edge like just outside of the 5/8 of an inch and just inside of 3/4 of an inch. But on your machine, it's going to be different because you won't have the same zigzag that I just did. It'll be really close, but it's not going to be the same. Okay, so now I'm going to put this just at that magic spot we figured, just outside of 5/8 of an inch, and make a zigzag. And that will become the space between the two is now where we're going to put our elastic. And I sew this twice. I do it once and then I do it right on top of it. Because when the girls put these on, they tend to like sit back in them and just yank them up their body. So if you can imagine where some stitch might pop, put another one. You could also shorten your stitch length. Oh, I went a little tight. You can shorten your stitch length and that'll make it stretchier, right? Did you know that's how zigzag works? Wider, shorter, more stretchy. Longer, narrower, less stretchy. The other thing you can do is kind of stretch this a little bit as you sew it, and that will help. That will help. So now that I did that one, I'm going to just flip it and go right over it. So I'm going right over the same stitch that I just did. Come on. because I don't want this to break ever. Actually, I'll skip the other leg opening, but you guys get where I'm going, right? We zigzagged over the edge, then we went in far enough so that what we have left is a 3/8 of an inch space. We didn't close it up, and then we zigzagged twice. This row up here is another place you could cover stitch, and it looks really super great. Before we serge again, we're going to grab our little extra pieces. So I've made one leg casing the whole way. The other one I will do in the night or Monday morning. And if you're new to this one, we've got a list, or I think we've got this scheduled one more time. I'm not 100% sure, but then we will probably add another one just because we're working on 2 costumes. And I want everybody to have lots and lots of info. So rather than rushing or not showing something, I just keep adding webinars. We won't charge you more. I just keep adding them until we cover everything. Do you see what I did there? I took that extra little piece that we cut and pinned it between the 2 layers on one center back. And now I'm going to do the same thing on the other center back. And then we're going to kind of stitch it like a reverse L. We're going to stitch the bottom and the innermost side of it first. Then we're going to zigzag a line 1 inch from the center back the whole way down, because that's our back seam allowance. And when we go to put all of this together, we want to know where the back seam allowance is. Oh, and actually, since we've got the white tutu kind of put together, we'll be able to use that one to show the tacking, but we'll use this one to show putting some layers on. Okay, so now I'm just zigzagging so that that piece that we added is really secure in there. I'm going to turn my corner nice. Do. Look, I don't even need to take this out of the machine. I can just put the next one right in there. It's harder to see it because we're on the sturdier side now. But I know right where it's at. I wonder who's messaging me. Somebody was going to add this class today in the afternoon, and they didn't. So I'm wondering if that's who's messaging me. Okay. So before we go to the serger, we're going to do a couple more sewing machine stitches here. So now we've got that little guy held in there. Now we're going to come in just 1 inch from the center back. Come here, Taylor. Why are you so crabby? Come here. Oh, I should give her something to chew on. So now I'm just 1 inch in from the center back. And that's why we cut that little support piece 1.5 inches. So this inch line that I'm stitching right now is where a hook and bar is going to go. So we're 1 inch in from there. Now we're going to come from the other side and go 1 inch in. Then we're going to serge the center backs and the top. And then we are going to come and put a sewing machine stitch 1 inch down from the top, because that's where our topmost piece of net's going. And if the nets aren't lying, the stretch meshes aren't lying perfect, just stretch them a little bit. Nobody's ever gonna know. Now, the good thing about stretch mesh is it doesn't unravel. So probably what we're going to do is feed our elastic in from the front to the back. Well, there's a couple things you can do. You can feed the elastic in and then serge over it and then later pull it out the back. Or you can put your crotches together and just cut a hole right in the casing so that you can always get to the elastic and adjust it. So it's kind of like, think about what you want to be able to do with it and then just make it work. Okay, back to the serger, which is right here. So now I'm going to serge the center backs together. So the little extra piece plus my other two edges. So there's one center back. And then I'm going to just bring the other one right to it. Double check that you've got everything in there that you should. Now we're going to serge across the top. And actually, I'm going to feed both my elastics in, so I think I will put the other leg casing in real quick. Now, you probably want to pin in something, but I'm just kind of like checking that I've got stuff lined up and going for it. This serger's pretty even. Sometimes you'll find that it moves the top or the bottom in faster. Then you need to adjust something. But it really should make the top and bottom travel exactly the same. You want to just set it facing that machine for a minute, and then I'm going to have you grab some 1/8" white elastic, a couple safety pins, the baby gate, and a King Henry hook and bar, and a free motion embroidery foot, and an awl.
Yeah.
I'll double check when you come back. Okay, so I'm going to just put the other leg casing in while Jared grabs us some goodies. 3/8" white elastic, 2 safety pins, King Henry hook and bar, baby gate, free motion foot. So I'm going to do that same distance, just outside of 5/8 inch. It's like right between 5/8 and 3/4. Except I go a little crooked. Good thing it's stretching. You can also just take a ruler, a small ruler, and give yourself dots the right distance from the edge the whole way along your casing. And that's totally fine too. Come here, Taylor, come here. She's got chewy treats in that blue bag up there.
Yeah.
Give her a chewy treat. And then bring a couple over by us so we can give her some more. That'll shut her up. A chewy stick. Oh, my posture's so bad, you guys, while I was sewing. Don't sew like I do. I'm all like, meh. Put a little back stitch there. Here you can back stitch at the edge because we're not cutting it off. Okay, so we've got our center backs beefed up. We have got our leg casings put in. We serged the top and the center back. Now I'm going to come down 1 inch from the top and zigzag a line. That's where my topmost netting is going to be placed. Now, if you're like, ugh, I made one of these up and I wish I had like 1 inch more girth in the panty, instead of adjusting anything on the panty, just put your top line only 1/2 inch from the top, and then wha-bam, you've got 1 inch more girth already. Ooh, and some little twill tape too, like that 1/4 inch twill tape. This panty's getting it all. So I've stitched down an inch from the top. That's where my topmost bit of netting is going to go. That's good. That's perfect. Okay, let me show you the next thing with this 1/4 inch twill tape. Just pile everything there. Look at that. Perfect. Perfect, perfect. So I've got this white twill tape here. Oh, I look so terrible, you guys. Don't get pneumonia. It's not fun. But I feel much better, except I can't sleep at night because the antibiotics are absolute torture. So now, right, I've got this piece of twill tape, and in a minute we'll zoom in on it, but I'm going to tell you what I'm doing. At the front of her leg, so not over here at the side, but at the front of her leg, that's somewhere you don't want the tutu to grow because it will get in the way of her moving. So I like to take a little piece of twill tape and zigzag it vertically up to the waist to keep that spot from growing. So here, zoom in on that. So here's the front of her leg, right? White on white. How great is that? I've got this piece of twill tape. I'm going to run it from the front of her leg up to the waist. And actually something Sabina's done for us, which I like how she's thinking. She just puts a little V there so that it's like there's 2 spots on the waist. And what the twill tape does is it keeps the panty from being able to grow. Take out the twill tape and the panty can stretch out quite a bit. Not only is it good for over time, but if you're a heavy-handed sewer, you might, as you sew, end up stretching this out, so that'll help stop that. Here, do you want a treat? We're her little treats. Let's give her another little treat. So I'm going to sew this little V on both sides. Look. Oh, do you want to have, I don't think she wants it. Sit down, Taylor. Sit. Sit down. Sit down. You know how to sit. Sit. Good girl. Too bad they're not like 2 inches thick. We need bigger ones. Okay, so I'm going to pin this little V on here. And you don't want it to go down into the leg casing. And actually, you can fold the little edge under. I'm not gonna because it's going to get covered up with netting. So I'm going to just leave it raw. And I'm going to make a little triangle just like that, a little Sabina triangle. You could totally fold the edge under, but it's going to get covered with a ton of stuff. So I'm not even going to fold the edge under. Nobody's even going to see this. So now we'll come to this side and just kind of repeat. There's, on the panty pattern, there is a little picture that shows where you can reinforce the sides. So even though this is a little bit different, just know this idea. Another thing, actually, that we would do at the Joffrey, we would make the panties out of 2 layers of the shearer mesh, but then we would take a piece of tricot nylon, which is kind of like a thin, actually sheer mat, sheer something that used to, sheer mist. I wonder if it was called sheer mist. Anyway, just a thin something that doesn't stretch. And we would put a 3 or 2 inch piece of that between the layers so that the crotch and butt of the panty stays stretchy. But by adding a non-stretch thin layer on the in-between, you're keeping this from growing and you're keeping it from growing around the other way too. So there's like lots of ways to do this kind of stuff. You can also cut a panty so that most of the basque goes down into the panty, and the only part of the panty that's going on is the bit with no netting that goes under their crotch. You can cut it that way also. So that is going to keep that from stretching ever. Back stitch that puppy on there. Then I got to think about our layers. We've got 1 and 2 combined. So we've got 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 are going on their own rows. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we're gonna put 6 lines on our panty, and our top plate is just gonna get jammed on top of the topmost piece of tulle. So 6 lines will be our magic number. Again, I don't want to close the leg casing. Posture, Travis, posture. We did a short follow-up, quick recording of the last of the ruffled tiered skirt. We just didn't invite anybody to it, but I will send that link out probably this weekend to everybody that did the skirts.
Nope.
Oh boy, she's not the smartest dog. That's all right. Okay, so now let's get our markings on here for the net, because I don't really want to place where you could just put it and face it down for a little bit. I don't really want to put the hook and bar on yet because I don't know where they're gonna go. But I just kind of, you can look at the pattern, but you can also just kind of eyeball where the netting is gonna go. So the top edge we know is going on that inch down from the top line. And I don't like it to dip too far down into the crotch. So I'm just putting a little bit of a curve there. And then where the casing kind of starts to leave the butt is where I like the back to go. And not too far down either. We don't want all this stuff, you know, jammed into their crotch. Maybe a smidge lower. So I'm just kind of guesstimating my bottommost line. And you can look at the pattern to get an idea for that. And we said we want 6 rows for 10 layers of net. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So my top one is just going to go on that line that's an inch down from the top. And then my bottom one we kind of laid out. Then I'm going to mark the other ones. And then just put on as many as you need, but I would challenge everybody to put on a little less than they currently do. Or if you've never made a tutu, just go crazy and load it up. I'm gonna also stitch across this kind of like a toy drum. Some people stitch in all the lines, and I've measured panties before they've stitched in all their lines. And when you stitch in all the lines, it makes the panty grow. So this drum across seems to make it grow less. It still makes it grow a little bit, but we don't want it to grow a ton. So I'm just marking half of this. Make sure I still got my 6. Does anybody have a question about any panty stuff? Well, I'm just going to keep making lines. Now I'm going to fold it in half to mark my other side. So I just like to fold it in half like this, match stuff up, and then just flip it over, and I can see my lines. It's going to come out more accurate than doing each side separately. At least for me, it comes out more accurate. And as you're sewing this on, just shoot to hit your lines. But if you don't worry, because it's just a bath sponge, essentially. 1, 2, 3, 4. So my bottom one is running right onto my leg casing in some places. So when you're sewing, you want to make sure that that ruffle is a smidge above the leg casing, because you don't want to close the leg casing. Makes sense. Somebody said, is the finer mesh on the inside or the outside? I've got it on the outside, but you can put it on the inside. It doesn't really matter. I know some folks have said, oh, put the softer on the inside because it feels good against her. She's wearing a tutu, and once you sew all this stuff on it, the soft side no longer feels soft anyways. So you can decide which mesh you want to have against their body. They are both right. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is just kind of go across this like a toy drum. And what that does is it's a little faster than stitching every line in, every row for every layer. But by putting the toy drum in, it keeps the two layers from shifting as you're going. Shh, Taylor, come here. Come here. No, she's just a hot mess. You're quiet. Why are you quiet all day long? Okay, so now you could put a couple pins in here. Actually, I'm going to put a couple pins in here. Come here. I'm going to put you in your box. Come here. She knows I'm putting her in her box. We'll see. It might be worse. We'll find out. Baby needs a nap. And this like little toy drum stitch across, you don't want to close the elastic casings. And you can pencil it on. I usually just kind of eyeball it totally. I try to make something of it hit the center front. You can also stitch a zigzag up the whole center front if you want to make sure you keep track of that for all time's sake. I bet both my sides didn't end up with the same amount of stuff. It's getting covered with knitting. For some of this stuff, I always tell people, just get her done. Do it good so that you can decorate this sucker. Because so often the notes I get about people are like, oh, I was so mired in doing absolutely everything perfect that by the time I was done, she just had a pink bodice and skirt with zero decoration on it. And I know we like decoration. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is put on my hook and bar. Will you grab me an awl? So now that we've got our layers or our rows for our layers of netting mark, just one, because I'm just doing one. Thanks. This is an awl. It's very sharp. Don't stab yourself. So now we can figure out where to put on our hook and bar. I usually like it to be about like 2 or 3 inches-ish down from the top. So I can just kind of say, oh, it's pretty close to falling in the second row. So that's going to be my hook. That's my hook side. And this is going to be my bar side. Taylor, we're right here. We're talking. We're having fun. Stop it. Boy, she's crabby. She did lose a tooth the other day, which terrified me. She was playing with her little white dog, and his whole neck was covered in blood, and I thought she'd bitten through the skin or something. And then I looked in her mouth, and she'd lost a baby tooth. So, okay, so hooks and bars by machine is the best thing on earth. And if you haven't seen a video, we've got one on our Facebook page. If you just like dig through the videos on Halsey Onstage. But I like to put this hook on now because it's horrible to try to put this on the panty when all the netting is on. So I've got an awl, and I'm going just inside my inch seam allowance where we decided the hook is. And I'm doing a wide zigzag, a bar tack. So I've got width but no length. And some people drop their feed dogs because it works better. For me, it doesn't change anything on the Bernina really. Then I'm going to go in another 1/4 of an inch and do one more. I'll hold this close because we do have some folks who are pretty much brand new to this stuff. And then some of you are like, Travis, gosh, we've seen this too many times. So I did 2 bar tacks over an awl, and I leave the awl in until I clip my threads. Then what I do is take my hook and slide it in upside down and backwards and flip it over So there's our hook in there. Now we're going to do the base of the hook to keep it from sliding around. And here I usually shrink my width a little bit. No, because I can send everybody a better video link. I think there's just 2 people who this might be new for. So you can hunt on Facebook and find it faster than I get around to sending it. Then I like to put one across the 2 things too. And you can put a dot of fray check on the back of these bar tacks afterwards, if you're worried they come out. Mine don't seem to ever come out, so I don't put a dot of fray check. Everybody's machine's a little different too. Like the Bernina kind of like yanks the bobbin. With each stitch, it pulls it nice and tight. So it kind of like ties itself off. So now I've got my bar. And the opening, if you look at the bar, there's a little opening in the loop. That opening faces the same way as the opening of a garment. Doesn't matter what you're making. That's just that there's a better way to do that. So I like to do up and down, and then I like to do the side where it's going to get yanked from, or like where the tension is. And if you're new to this, you'll break needles and lose an eye. So wear glasses. I worked with one lady who was always coming around handing out safety glasses. It was so annoying. She was that kind of manager. She didn't really do anything sewing related, but she wanted to make sure OSHA wasn't going to come and shut us down. Okay, so we've got the hook and bar on. Later, right, like right now, the hook is just open like this. The hook is just open. Later on, it's going to get folded over and stitched back by hand. But now, the other thing I like to do is put the elastic in right away. So this girl needs about 18 inches of elastic because her thigh is about 20. And when we're done, this 18 will be like a little less than 17. Another great thing you can do is you can run the elastic in, like if you're fitting somebody, right? So this one's just going in the mail. If I've got somebody and I'm there to fit them, I will stitch the side, kind of imagine where the side seam would be. I'll stitch the elastic there to the panty so that I can yank the front and back separately so that I can make the butt a little bit tighter and the front not so tight. But this one is just going in the mail and it's going to fit just great. So we're just going to feed the elastic in, and we're not going to leave it. They'll be able to tighten it from the back, but we're going to just serge it right into the front. So that's why we haven't serged across the crotch yet. And I put a safety pin on each of these because after all the netting is on, we've got the elastic in there ready to pull through and finish off. I know some folks put the elastic in after all the netting is on, and it's not fun at all, let me tell you. So I just get it in there and don't really let it gather up the panty. I just want my front to match, get it nice in there. It fits really great in the casing, so whatever we did to figure that out was just spot on. And the seam allowance in the crotch, when you put your crotch together, it's about 3/4 of an inch because that gives you a little bit of something to let out down the line if you need to. A full inch is a bit much. And that's something else too that you can gauge by girl, right? So if you've got itty bitty kids, you might take away a little bit of seam allowance there. It's totally your call. Would you, Jared, go and see if there's any white netting that I can just cut up for samples? and ruffle here, show some ruffling things. There might be some in that box. Oh, good, you've got some. Then get me a piece of high mark thread, another safety pin, and see if there's chopsticks in that top drawer. Ooh, and a number 3 Bernina foot. Poor Jarrett, he's just got to run around. It's because we were working right up until the webinar. Okay, so I am going to just stitch in 3/4 of an inch from my crotch edge. And I'm going to just go right over that elastic. So we're saying that if this gets adjusted, it's getting pulled from the back now. It's not going to get pulled from the front and the back. But you can adjust and change any of this. Make it your own. Then on the back, so right, this is giving us something to line up when we're trying to close the crotch when all the netting is on there. In the back, you can just stitch 3/4 from the edge, but don't go into the leg casing. You don't want to close that up. So this is just kind of giving us a line later on to match up. And I'm going to serge across the front. You can also serge across the back and then just cut a clip next to the serging to pull the elastic through. But I'm going to choose not to serge my back because it does not unravel. Woohoo!
Skinny paintbrushes.
Oh yeah, skinny paintbrushes will work. And then a number 3 Bernina foot, if you can find one.
Yep.
Oh, you've got one. Perfect. So we're going to just look at some ways to gather and pleat and ruffle netting. Oh, grab a fork too, where I'm going to just show everybody everything I possibly know. So I'm going to show you some different ways to deal with condensing netting if you don't have a Johnson ruffler or an imperial pleating machine like we have. Okay, I'm just turning around and serging my front crotch, and then we're going to start looking at different ways to deal with net. So I'm just serging my elastic right in there. You're not missing a thing. Oh, except I turned the serger off. Maybe the puppy's gonna stay quiet now. Okay, so I serged the front crotch. We've got our elastics in there ready to go. We've got, perfect. We've got everything. No, I'm good. We've got everything marked, and we've got whatever hardware we can get on there now, because this is also a nightmare to try to sew that on later. Sometimes on a lead lady, I'll put one a little higher and then one a little bit lower. But for a competition thing, and actually this is just for a gift, and she might wear it for guesting, but I think it's going to primarily be fashion-y kind of shoots and stuff. I'm having some water. Okay, I'm gonna cut up those pieces of netting in half so I've got more stuff. Actually, are they pretty long? That'll work. I'll get a lot out of this. Maybe lower this just a tiny little bit so they can see the foot. Okay, so there's so many ways you can do this, right? I know some amazing gals at Ballet West. They just freehand all of it. That's pretty good. They just freehand everything, and their tutus are absolutely spectacular. So you can make a zigzag, and you can just start doing double or triple pleats.
Oh, shit,
what? Okay. So there's lots of ways to do this. So one is to just like start, if I had the table, if this was down in the table, it would be easier. I'm just making little doubled pleats and saying that's gonna work. But what you've got to do is make a sample and see how close you are getting it to fitting on that row on the panty. You can also squish a little bit in at the side, which is good. So those are just 2 pleats. Let's do 3 pleats. And there's also some videos on YouTube for double hand pleating, which is very popular. Our pleating machine pleats a double hand pleat, so we never have to do it by hand. So for us, it's just called disc number 3. It's not a double hand pleat. So there I'm doing 3. And that's very beautiful and acceptable. And once you practice a little bit, you'll get really, really good at it. Sometimes an awl or a stiletto, a sewing stiletto, is helpful too to do that. So that's 3 all going the same way. You can also do 2 or 3 one way. So this is getting closer to a double hand pleat, but not quite. So see what I've done is I've got 2 pleats on top of each other, and then I'm going to fold up a pleat going over the 2 of them. So let's do a few of that. So I'm going to go pleat, pleat, and then I'm going to fold up a big piece that goes right over the 2. This is actually the first tutus I made, we gathered, and then the second round of learning I had, this is the pleat we actually used, where we do 2 and then do 1 that wraps over those 2, which is similar to a double pleat. I don't even know what you call this, honestly. It's like a pleat and a pleat and a pleat. So I'm doing 2 pleats and then folding a layer over it and advancing. And that packs in, if you look at the edge of this, you can see we're packing in quite a bit of material. You could even do that same idea, but do 3 pleats, 1, 2, 3, and then fold a pleat over it. So just the more pleats you're stacking on top of each other, the more material you're swallowing up and the fuller your layer is. I know some makers that pleat it all by hand right into the machine, have a pleat for their lower layers and then a pleat for their higher up layers, so they're controlling how much they're packing in. So that's great. You can see these ones that got 3, it's even fuller, the amount that we're smushing in there. So now let's look at some like other ways that you can do this, and you can combine them all different. Another one is to take a fork and fold a pleat. So this is a really big pleat. This would be a floppy tutu. You just take the fork and fold it. And you can actually take the fork and fold them so that they're more, actually you would want to do it so that they're more stacked on top of each other, rather than doing one and then going all the way to the edge of it. You just sew half the pleat, put the fork in, flip the fork over, use the fork to hold it, use the fork like an awl. So the less you advance the sewing machine, let's just catch just the corner of the pleat. The less you advance the sewing machine and the closer your fork pleats are, the fuller your stuff will also be. So that's with a fork. There's also a way you can come further out and go 1. This fork narrows in. You can get forks that are more square. A more square one will help you. You could do 1, let's see how far out we've got to go, to do 1 flip and then do another whole flip. So that's kind of like, oh, I lost it in there. That's pretty full, but it would take some practice. So all of this stuff takes practice. And if I had a straighter fork, there, that one works pretty good. It will go straighter. So that, if you see that edge, that makes kind of a nice back and forth kind of a roll. That's what you get with flipping the fork 2 times. Then similar to that, we like to do with a chopstick for some stuff. I just learned this last year. You just put, I've got paint brushes, so a chopstick's a little wider. You just put your 2 chopsticks in and decide how much. So this makes that rolled twirly pleat that a lot of people just love. So what you've got to gauge is how far out here am I starting, and then I'm just twirling up to the presser foot. And you want to make sure that you're not getting weird old twists in there. And actually, the times we've done this, I find if I leave a little space and then jam it in, it comes out, it lays a little bit nicer rather than having that gap between them all. So if you come less far out, you will have less of a rolled pleat. So leave a little space and then jam it in there. And this is just a really fun look. And there's variations of this that you can invent yourself. But look there. So that makes a really different look, but these rolled ones are really stiff and they make a really pretty top layer. Let's do one more rolled one. So again, you're the gauge. Wherever you put this is how much material you're shoving in there. I'm putting in a lot because it shows. And again, jam it right up underneath there. So you can kind of see, yeah, that's pretty fun. And they go, wah, 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 wah. I wouldn't do a whole tutu like this, but I think a top layer, or for structure, you could put this the second layer down and then just put gathered netting or tulle on top of it. And these rolled pleats are really going to help hold stuff forever and ever. Let me show you some other ones. So that's like pleating with apparatus or pleating by hand. Now let's do more kind of a few little gathering demos. Number one, super easy one, is you just take bobbin thread. So I've got my bobbin thread, and you can wind a heavier thread if you want. And let's say this layer of tutu needs to fit at my high hip, 32 inches. Pull out a little more than 32 inches from your bobbin and run it to the back, and then make a zigzag. And we're going to actually, I think we start in the front. We're going to zigzag this onto the bobbin thread that we're holding. That's what it is. You keep it in the front. There's a different one where it goes in the back. So I anchored my stitch, and I've got this bobbin thread. And what I can do is hold the bobbin thread and let the material gather out onto it. So you kind of have to kind of watch where the edge of your net, if you're getting to the end of your netting, you want to feed enough bobbin thread as you're going. And if you were doing this way, I would say before you gather it, put a safety pin at your middle and your quarters so that when you're putting it on the panty, you know where those places are. So that's zigzag over a bobbin thread. Another version of that is to just take a heavy duty thread and zigzag onto the heavy duty thread. So this is high mark hand sewn thread. But check this out, and the people at Bernina don't care. This is a Bernina buttonhole foot, which has a channel underneath it, 2 channels for the grooves of the buttonhole buildup to fit into, but it also has a toe in the front. So what I used to do before I got great machinery is I would take that foot and put it on the machine, and then I would take my heavy duty thread And so if my layer needs to be 32 or 33 or 34 when I'm done, I would make a loop that's just a little bit bigger than that. So my loop isn't really to size, but you tie a knot and make a loop. Oh, I undid it. Oh no, I did it. And then you take that loop and put it on the middle toe of a Bernina number 3 foot, and you let it hang out the back. Then you take your netting, let me cut this off. I mean, I think it's just the greatest thing. You can only end up with exactly much as you need. You put your netting underneath there and zigzag. In the end of your loop, put a safety pin actually, so that it doesn't run its way off. Do I got enough that it shows? A little more. So you got to kind of ease it off the back as you're going. And then you don't want to lose the loop when you take it out of the machine, which is easier said than happened. Oh, I'm going to lose the loop. Don't lose the loop. Don't lose the loop. I got him. So then, since your loop is already the finished length, you need the whole loop. Then you just keep working this stuff down onto there until you've run out of net and you've got your whole loop finished. And this works really super great. I think this method, so see if you've got a foot that's got a middle toe, this just works great. And I sent Bernina a little note and a drawing a long time ago that I figured that out. And they're like, that foot is for buttonholes, sir, not for gathering. Some, not these Berninas, but some of them have a zigzag that goes to the center, like a 3-step stretch stitch. So it goes zig in the middle, outside, in the middle, outside. That works really good with that buttonhole foot, because then it's almost like you have 2 gathering threads and your top edge comes out much more flatter than I've got here. Cool? Cool. Let's see. Set this back up just kind of facing this machine. See if anybody has any questions. And I am going to start putting the white bodice together and just give you guys my 2 cents on pinning and accuracy and stuff. Then we're going to ruffle up our ruffles before Monday, and I will show you some going on to the panty. And then I think we will do a little check-in on both bodices, and we will tack the whole pink tutu together since it's already got its layers on. And then the follow-up day, I'm not sure when we're adding it, but everybody will get the recording. It'll probably be on Tuesday. We just marathon these suckers. We'll do anything else that we didn't show you the entire step or process of. So I'm going to grab the white bodice, which I should steam each piece a little bit to set in the color, but I can steam it after it's put together. Iron it a little bit. So we're going to just kind of see what the white one, which isn't all white, is going to start looking like as it goes together. Actually, you could grab me a chunk of boning and a couple pliers that we can put them on by hand and a couple tips. You know which big ones cut it, right? Yeah, okay. See if you can find those and a needle nose. Okay, so when I put stuff together, I try to deal in halves, like front and back, or side and side. And since this bodice doesn't have a side seam, I'm going to put my hips onto my sides first. Then I am going to put my a back on and a front on so that we have a right half and a left half. Then later on, I'll put the center fronts together. And we can look at which way this, so not all bodices have an internal horizontal seam, but this one will end up with that. And we will look at a way to deal with that. So I'll be stitching across my bone casing, even though I've said don't close your bone holes. So this one later, we'll just put a little clip in the flat lining, and this will get the bones fed in from the top. But the first thing you're going to do is match your notch. Oh, good. Well, I'll just see if there's the needle nose that go like this and like that.
Oh, that curve.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Or just a sturdier one. And then we'll tip a bone together too. So again, I like to take itsy bitsy bites, not great big bites. So I've got my notch matched, and then I'm going to match my extreme edges next. That's perfect. Thank you. Now, you just as you're going along, if you're like, this one piece seems bigger, or has ease, or has bias, or has stretched, or something, change the way you're pinning so that that piece ends up against the feed dogs, because the feed dogs will naturally ease it back together. Got some stray threads. I'll get all my serge worms later. So we'll get at least one side of this together. And cut a bone. We have a bone tipping thing. It doesn't cut. It's the best. And you can actually get handheld bone tippers, or like the grommet press style bone tipper from farthingales.com. If that's a new company to you, check them out. Okay, so most sewing machines, this Bernina goes 0 to 5, and the default stitches at a 2. It's too small for theatrical sewing. If you've got nice thread, you can go a whole number above the middle, and that would be where most all of your sewing other than basting should happen. It's pretty common to walk into a costume shop and there be bitchy notes above the sewing machine taped on that say, don't use such a small stitch. Because when somebody has to alter it, it's a nightmare to pick it out. A little bit above the middle should be a good basic all sewing stitch. Other than basting, that's the longest stitch you've got. So I'm just matching my lines up, and I'm sewing right up to my pin. I don't care how great the width of the seam allowance is. I care that I'm matching the stitching lines. Especially on a bodice, it's a very precise thing. I'm back stitching at the intersection. And here you can back stitch a little bit at the edge. This will need some pressing, but now we've got our hip and a side piece together. This is what we've got so far. What's going to happen after I press this is I'm going to press it open first, but I already know that this top curve is going to want to lay down towards the hip. So what I'm going to do later on is cut out half of the seam allowance that's on the hip. So here's my hip. I'm going to cut out half of the seam allowance that's on the hip and cross stitch my side over it so that I have a nice flat thing and I have less bumps on the outside, okay? So knowing that I'm going to do that, before I do my seams on either side, where the seam is, I'm going to just trim out a little bit of my hip right now so that after the other part is sewn, I can still get into there. So I'll be trimming out half of the hip and cross stitching the side down over it. That happens in lots of places where you've got these internal, more horizontal seams. Usually they will just stay open, but see, like right now, I can't get it to just stay open and lay on the table. That means it doesn't want to stay open, and I've got to conform to whatever it wants. So now let's put a side and a front, a front and a back on here. So I just got to find the right back. So I've got the right back, and that seam, I'm gonna push it towards the hip because that's where it's gonna eventually go. In the proper world, I would trim and cross stitch that right now before I put it to the back, but this is the TV world, and that's not going to happen. So I'm matching my notches. If you have our imperial pattern, there is a notch in the wrong place, but it seems as if everybody is understanding that there is a notch in the wrong place and they're dealing with it. It's such a good price anyway, so it's not on my list to go remove that one notch. But I suppose I could at least put a note on the page when you buy it that says this notch is in the wrong spot. And also, it's funny, it comes up every now and then in email or messenger. Somebody will say, I like your bodice and I like your patterns, but I have no idea how the order that they go together, meaning like across from the back to the front or something. And generally, they're all laid out on the pattern paper in the way that this piece joins the guy next to him. You know, generally they're laid out that way, rather than like a McCall's pattern or something where it's all over the place and you have to be number one investigator. So now at the top and bottom of this piece, it's going to get whacked off and piped. So I don't need to back stitch at the top, but I do need to back stitch within the piece. So I'm going to sew right up to the pins. And another thing too that I tell people when I'm with them in person in a class is that you've got to pay attention to what's going on underneath. Right? You know, you're not just holding it. You're like, you know, using it like braille to see if something is askew or going the wrong way. You can even peek every now and then just to see what's going on. So now I'm back stitching within the piece and running off the edge. This is going to be so pretty when it's covered with all that lacy stuff. And look, for eyeballing where the color goes, it's close enough. I've got the pink about in the same spot from front to back. I've got my purples a little bit off, but once the lace goes over this, it is going to be just fine. Oh, sometimes this 4-ply silk, some places call it Duchess satin, which is just thick ass silk. So you could also look for Duchess satin. So now I'm going to put my center front on here. I love these patterns that don't have side seams. There's a lot of old Karinska ones that just go from the front all the way around to the back. And when you do that, if you're making a pattern that goes from the front all the way around to the back, your bodice pretty much can't go much beyond the waist because you don't have an opportunity for a seam to go in and out, you know, like over the hip. So if you're really having fun patterning and getting rid of seams, think about that if it's going to go from the front to the back, you've got to keep it above, at the waist. You can't go below the waist. Someone said, does the center front have to be the Greenline? If you are making a bodice like that, the center front probably is your absolute straight of grain. It might have weirdo darts in it, but it's more on grain than anything else. There's also some old Karinska costumes where there's just a front, kind of the shape of front we've got, where it's just a big angle, and then the side, front, side, back, and back, all the seams are gone, and they've put the whole thing on the bias, so the whole thing just wraps around and sucks to their body. And then they usually put some interfacing or some way to kind of reinforce the center back and keep the center back running nice and flat. Some of the old ones have a nice bone at the center back. That's something I'll do from time to time. So again, I'm conscious of which way that seam is running. Oh, there must be that little fan is on in the back. You don't have to go get it now. I was trying to figure out what that sound is. It's like radio static or something. Oh, I wonder what that sound is. We have a lot of random sounds going on. Okay, so, upstairs we have a lot of photographers. There's all kinds of people wandering through this building. So today we have an old-timey elevator, right, where you have to like open and close the door yourself. I was waiting to get on the elevator, and a whole family of very put together people were upstairs having their photo taken, and the amount of discussion they were having inside the elevator about it not opening was hilarious. So I just stood looking at them in the little window as if I too did not know how to get the elevator open. And then eventually I just swung the door open. It's manual. They were waiting for it to just spring open. Darling, I think it's broken. Should we call someone? How did we get in here? You know, it's like that was my other favorite part. They could not remember from the time they went from the 5th floor to the 1st floor that they had to open the door on the 5th floor. Unless somebody put them on and sent them down. That could have been the case too. There's even a plaque, I think, by the elevator that says how to get in it. It's like there's notes everywhere. I think we'll cut a couple bones, and then I'll show you guys what I mean about the cross stitching this hip down. Woo! That was a thick spot. Good thing I trimmed some away. Right? It looks like this doesn't match. It does. It's just I've left extra fabric on the bottom that's going to get serged off later. I think of a lot of sewing more like you do a painting, like I think about like negative space, or that it's like a chunk of stone and you're carving out a bodice. So so that's fun. There, this is starting to look like a something. You can kind of see there's a bust happening. This is going to get pressed open real nice, and when the bone goes in, it's going to look like icing on a cake. Oh, sorry, I was holding the wrong stuff. So you can kind of see our bust is going on. We got our center front. You can see that there's an armhole in here. It's just filled in with fabric right now. So, and then this I'll put on the dress form eventually and just kind of like eyeball whether I think everything is in the right spot, since we won't be fitting this girl. you know, I don't want to miss an opportunity to make it probably fit better, even though we've got good measurements, and I'm pretty confident this will fit well. Let's do a bone. I can do it. I'm trying to think, what am I going to do next? I said I'll do a bone, and then I'll cross stitch. I can go up there. Okay. I'll move up to the table. So all these seams are going to get pressed open, but they're not going to get ironed. I'm not going to go, I'm going to just go up and down really, 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 really nice. But let's do a bone together. There are those people out there that say the bones should be shorter than the channel of which they're going. And I think that's great if you want a wrinkled bodice. To have less wrinkles, the bone really needs to press from each extreme edge to the next. So it needs to be pushing from the top to the bottom. So you can measure the bone casing on your pattern, but right, we've like cut the cotillion, we've sewed on the bone casing, we've been monkeying with it. I find you get a more accurate measurement by just laying the bone casing on there. Grab it with your finger where it needs to be cut and cutting it. And then to tip it, you need 2 pair of pliers. So I've got so this is spiral inch, 1/4 inch bone casing. Eventually, if anybody's interested in buying some from me, we have tons and tons and tons of it. Maybe I'll get it on sale at some point. But like for what you pay for like 12 tips at some places, you could just get a whole bag full like this. So I think we'll start reselling bones and bone tips. Not the casing. I don't have a source for it, but I've got a source for the other stuff and can make a deal. So see what I did? I'm using 1 pair of pliers to hold it, and then I've got like a curved needle nose pliers that I'm squishing the other edges in at the same time. And like our little bone tipping thing, you just stick it in there and press the pedal, but it's good to know how to do it the old school way. There's also a fluid you can get from like Farthingales and Richard the Thread. I just don't have the patience to wait for it to dry. So I like to use this stuff. And then remember, your bone casing has a channel inside of it. And you're just going to get all your bones slid in. You can pipe whichever edge that your bones aren't being sewn in from first, and then you can slide 1/2 of the bones in. So up against her body, that's going to be really nice and flat. Then the other thing to know is if your bone should be too tight, if you actually get it jammed in there too tight and you get like weird ridges on the outside of the bodice, that's an indication that it like actually, yes, the bone is a smidge too long. And the other thing that's good to know is if you're getting wrinkles on the outside and your bones are a little short, see, actually, even though I walked this one along, that the bone should be about right there, but it's right here. It's all right to just push the bone up in there and just run a stitch through all your layers right below it. Nobody is ever going to see it on this side, and that will help tighten up the casing. So you want nice tight bones to get a nice flat thing, and this all needs pressed. So now let me show you what I was talking about with this hip. So see, I've pushed these seams down. Oh my gosh, I actually have. I'll sew this in black so that it'll show up. But then I'm going to take it out and do it in white. So I'm going to trim out 1/2 of my hip side. So if you're able to fit this on somebody, don't do this first unless you think you're not going to need to adjust it there. You probably aren't going to need to adjust it there. So I'm going to trim out 1/2 of that. And see, remember I trimmed the beginning and end of it earlier so I could stitch the rest real nice. Then I should press this, but I'm not going to right now because we're almost at the end of the day. So you could kind of press it open first and then press the top down. But we're going to catch the top seam allowance to the hip, and we're going to catch just the cotillo. We're not going to catch, oh, I guess that's a gigantic needle. Let me see if I have a more better needle, and I do. So I'm going to do this in black just so you can see the stitch. And some places call it a herringbone stitch, and some places call it a cross stitch. Some books call it a suspended hemming stitch, but it's all the same thing.
I've also heard it called a catch.
Catch stitch actually is a different thing.
Oh, really?
That just means you're just catching a part of something. You can use other stitches and just use it to catch a small bit.
Oh.
Yeah. So in a cross stitch, the bottom part of it would be called the catch, but it's not a catch stitch, I think, as far as like what I know about hand sewing. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I don't want threads showing on my outside. I just need to catch the cotillo. So really, well, I guess a herringbone and cross stitch is 2 rows of catch stitching. You could call it maybe like a double catch stitch. I would be fine with that. So I hid my knot underneath there. And then in the bottom of it, I only am catching the cotillo. On the top, catch all sorts of stuff. But on the bottom, I only want the cotillo. And I'm keeping a finger underneath there, because if I've stabbed my finger, I've obviously gone too far to the outside. There, I stabbed my finger. I've gone too far to the outside of everything, and I'm going to have problems. And then with a lot of theatrical sewing, I like to just every now and then tie a knot, even if I'm not at the end of my thing, because it is going to just be better that things don't unravel. So when this gets pressed, this is going to lay down a little bit nicer. Catch just the cotillo. So when we look at this side, there's no puckers or there's no threads showing. I haven't actually caught any of the silk. It's completely loose. So I'm going to do that on my sides. And then let's just get our, so look, you can kind of start to see that like, oh my heck, there is a hip in there. This whole thing actually is going to work. So there we've got our built-in hip coming, and you can see that we have a bust coming. And then all of this, so these are some of our top plate ones. I'm going to cut more out for the bodice, but we're going to be doing the same kind of thing. We're going to be appliquing this stuff on here and letting it trickle up onto the bodice. And we'll probably lay a lot of it out on a dress form, or if you're laying it out without a dress form, keep it curved the way the body's curved. So how I've got it on my hand right now is the way her body moves. So you just want to keep aware of what's going on. But I will try to find 2 big sections that'll cover a lot of stuff, and it looks like I'm going to be able to do that. And then what's nice with this mesh stuff is if you feel you need a dart in it, you probably need a dart, but you don't have to make an actual dart. Like, so see if it seems like it's wanting to do that, if it's wanting to overlap to lay flat, just figure out where you can kind of squirrel a clip up in between there, and then just let the motifs lay over each other a little bit rather than folding them into a lump. Okay? That is going to be exquisite. And then I'm going to have to figure out and make sure if I really want to use this white. But I think I do. It's overkill, but for a magazine, I think it will still be fun to figure out. Maybe not all of this. I might cut quite a bit of this out, but those together are sure going to be a lot of fun. Oh yeah, the texture on this alone is pretty darn cool. So that's where this is headed, and look how cool that little bit of airbrush is. And even though it's not the exact same purple, that's close. Once we start bringing this stuff down onto the skirt, we're going to have a really nice illusion from white to purple back up to white with beads. I think that's where we're going to stop today. Let me look real quick. Does it let me look on the webinar page while this is actually going? I'm going to peek on the computer to see if we already do have Mondays scheduled. I think it'll let me. Where's the mouse at?
It's dying.
It's because I usually use that pad. Let me just check that this one meets 4 times, but we're going to probably add a 5th. Yes, Monday, December 17th. Okay, so we've got an hour check-in from 3 to 4 on Monday. So I'll probably show you netting going on the panty and some more bodice stuff going on. And then probably Tuesday the 18th, we'll add another thing from 3 to 4 on Tuesday the 18th. And I'll send the link out for that. So if you're not available, totally fine. You're going to get the video that has all the same information in it. And that's where we're going to stop today. This purple thing is looking really cool. Ooh. Goodbye. Have a nice weekend.